Okay, welcome. It's 3 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Shawnna, and you are in Decoding Cult Manipulation, if that sounds right. Hopefully you're in the right spot today. So it's nice to meet you. If you would like to scan this QR code, you will have access to my entire PowerPoint and my notes for your convenience. If that's something you would like to do, it's there for you. I will wait a couple minutes for people to get it there. And if you're watching online, I put the link right there, so you can tap on that link maybe, or scan it with your phone. All right. Well, like I said, my name is Shawnna. It's nice to meet you. I am a counselor. I'm someone who you may also consider themselves a survivor of situations, abusive situations myself. And I get into that a little bit later. And as I check in, as I scan across the room, who do I have in here? Do we have any other clinicians in here? If you can raise your hand. I don't know if you guys saw, but I did a poll just to see what people were interested in, and you can look at it on the WOV app. It doesn't matter if you didn't vote or anything. We're going to talk about all this stuff, but I thought it was really interesting, and this was open to the entire conference. There is zero interest in this. Why do you think that is? That's interesting. So all of us are in the digital space. Who's on social media? Okay. Aha. Oh, okay. See. All right. So most of us are on social media, and yet even at a conference here, there is little, maybe one. I would be this two who would have said, yes, let's talk about this in the digital age. But it's interesting that there is a lack of interest, and yet many of us are digital users. Many of us are on social media. And so I just thought that was interesting. We're going to talk about these. We're definitely going to talk about the one nobody wanted to talk about except for you and me. But so to begin, I am pulling from one of Hassan's latest books. And I talk about that throughout this PowerPoint. And you may be like, oh, Hassan, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right, but he's here. But you may be like, I've heard so much about him, and he's going to be throughout this presentation. And the reason maybe he's even oversaturated in literature so much is because there is a need so great. And right now there are maybe one or two, Hassan is one, I think there's a couple others that are talking about the things that we're talking about. So we're needing more people to present, we're needing more in the literature. And so as we begin today, I'm going to open up with my why. So this is my sister Hope and my mom, who's passed away since then. So I am Nigerian and Irish. I come from a family where my mother and father were never together. They met at a rehab center, and my mom had never been with a white man, and my dad had never been with a Black woman, and thus I came out. And so I have had a long history in the counseling world, a long journey myself in this. And right around, I think it was 2016, when I got to really meet my mom and my sister for the first time, I discovered something was going on in the mom side of my family. And what that was is what we in research would consider generational sex trafficking is the term. And I discovered that on my own, and through those interests that formed naturally through my story and what was happening there and the resources I was getting to or trying to get to protect my sister to come out of that environment. It was extremely difficult. It was extremely hard, and it inspired me and why I'm here today and why I do what I do. But most in particular, I'm going to pin this on the right to warn. Does anybody know about the right to warn? This is a document that came out from William Sanders. I didn't think so. So it's about open AI and technology. And why am I talking about this at a cult conference? Why does this matter to you? So maybe you have heard in some of the sessions here, but it is extremely hard legally to convict someone of undue influence or cultic influence. And there's even been discussions about what is it to have the right to a free mind. And so as we begin to uncover and unearth, at least in my story, I found that my generational sex trafficking within my family could totally be run completely online through social media, and it was a business. They can traffic drugs, they can traffic people through there, and social media was the main connector for this, and instantly global connection for trafficking people and individuals and keeping this business going through social media. And I was like, And it wasn't just social media, it could be through any other traditional terms of technology. And now with AI advancing even more, what we're seeing is in the world where we here at this conference, we talk about cultic influence, we talk about undue influence, we talk about the unethical sides of these things. But in academia, there is none of that in my field. So I'm a counselor educator. We don't even have a word necessarily for it. It was all just kind of blocked under cults. It's kind of like whenever we have a hard situation in counseling that we don't know what to do with, cults is kind of what falls under here. And so as I began to research and found kind of what was going on, again, this is particular to American society, I realized that the right to warn, which I'm going to show you right here, from William Sanders, and this is where you can find this. I have this cited here. He talks about how AI technology is beginning to have legal ramifications for what we're talking about, the freedom of mind. And what I mean by that specifically is as you read through some of these things here, this is the legal discourse that's happening right now in America about undue influence. It may not sound like it, it may not be something that's a direct parallel, but there are very strategic things that are happening. And if we are not aware of the conversation that's going on in social media and what's happening and what's influencing us, whether that's a negative or positive, and hear me, I love me some good social media. I'm not here to say ixnay the social media, but I am here to say there is a right to warn about what's going on. And when we think about undue influence and cultic influence, there's some good stuff here to be aware of and to be looking out for. And so as we continue, that's kind of where I started, is understanding that there is technology has something going on here. And that was the first legal discourse, which we get into more of this later, where I discovered if we are going to walk down the path of how to help people from a legal standpoint, right now it's happening in technology, and the ramifications of that are important because it applies to what maybe some of you or many of you or those who are advocates for other are interested in. And so for me personally, though, it was really noticing that when my younger sister, just in general with social media, you know, her youth and the friends, there's a lot of depression going on. This is a great resource to look at. And it is, again, talking about a very nuanced side of what we think about how we're being influenced and shaped and how is that affecting younger generations. Okay. Here is the question. Given the significant influence of social and traditional media on our perceptions and convictions, how can we utilize storytelling to support cult recovery and enhance comprehension and resilience to manipulation and control? So go ahead and take just a couple minutes, reread the question, and I want you to pair and share with those around you. And if you're far in the back, you can pair with my husband there. You're fine there. He'll be helping out. He's well versed. But take a few moments and think about this question and just talk about it amongst yourselves. And if you're online, you can do the chat. And that's actually a lot of what we talked about here is kind of what I encounter when I enter into any kind of cult conversation about recovery, or when clients come in and they tell me, before they even begin, they kind of like warn me. They're like, okay, you know, get ready, here's the story. And even when I talk about my own story and the nuances and the things that you have to go through and the levels and details of it is difficult, and it has been done well. So I pulled this is from American Society. I'm not very global in my TV. I'm going to work on that. So what I have pulled here is anybody familiar with any of these? Fallout, Westworld? Can I just see the hands? Show your hands. Okay, there's some of us in here. Okay, so for those who are not, I'm going to start with Fallout. So the two pictures I have here are the directors. I like that it's a male and female co-duo. And so Fallout is originally a video game. And it was this story that it's a story that has kind of adapted. I don't know the original, I'm not a gamer, so please don't get mad at me, if you're a gamer here, but the original story, as I believe it, is there are these vaults, and it's this post-apocalyptic world. And in these vaults, there are basically authorities and power figures that will kind of live out whatever they deem is like the best Earth. Okay, and this is a very popular TV series. And I love how in these two quotes they capture. These are both of these theories, and Westworld is from an AI perspective, which is why I put it up here. Both of these captures a very nuanced story. Some of these are long seasons, some of them have multiple layers, and they talk about how do we form stories to engage critical thinking. And it has been done. There's people who watch this, who obsess over it. They play the game over and over. It's complex. It has multiple parts. It's very detailed. So I put this up here to say it can be done well. It has been done. There are many here who watch this and this even, again, this is graphic. So I'm not saying like, hey, show your clients this. No, trauma-informed practices all the way. But I am saying there are ways where we can connect literature and things that are already happening in the world to what we know as cults. And so I'm going to kind of dive into that a little bit more. So when we talk about stories and the stories that I am telling and the stories that are coming up for my clients, and we talk about cult recovery, what does that actually mean? And so my field and what I have kind of come up with is when clients come to me, their entire worldview is usually completely shattered and crumbled, including what I would say the inner lining of the psyche, which is also, the soul, the inner lining of a soul feels fractured, ruptured. And so what we are really talking about is how do people know what they know? How do they really know it's true? And what is right and good? And then what I do is kind of over here in the middle. I am interested in all of those things. I study all of these things. I work with clients to understand how do you know what you know? And how is that shaping your trajectory and your healing journey? And so as we begin to talk about that, and this isn't exactly how I wanted this to go, I begin to understand that like this one piece right here, maybe my truth, it's kind of flat, almost like this picture, like this is what I have, okay? But you know what? As soon as a client comes and tells me something, this is another piece of the truth that I have that I need to look at. And then as I research, here's another piece that I need to look at. And so all of these form more of like this kind of 3D, even as we were beginning to talk about your healing journey and reshaping. That's actually how I encourage my young clinicians to begin to understand truth. And it may be interesting to have this come up in a conversation, but oftentimes when I am advocating in my field, there is something about, well, how do you know that's true? Or is that only true for their experiences? Or, truth gets a little bit muddled, but as far as the healing purposes for me, I need the research. I need the client perspective. I need all of these to form a little bit more of a clearer perspective, okay? And so this is formed from psychological roots of partisanship. It has some aspects of political agendas in there because often when I'm talking about cults, there is some sort of political, not often, I wouldn't say, I'm going to change that. I'm going to say that in the academic realm, it is hard to come into a space and talk about cult recovery and talk about what we're talking about without some sort of political agenda getting in the way. It's really difficult. And so what I have found to kind of bypass, if that's the word we want to use, or at least sit with different views and different opinions, is I'm going to say, well, I need yours and I need yours. And yes, there is going to be some good and some truth that happens here. And there is a part of characterological formation that happens too, whereas we are talking about what is it that is good and right, and how do I wrestle with what has happened to me, and how do I change that or change the story in a way that is still truthful and also represents this kind of idea that truth can be in many forms and woven in many threads, and how can I honor somebody's story without them having to come in and explain it to me. We talk about this more a little bit later, but this is how I view truth, how I view this idea. And in my original PowerPoint, this cube then turned. It's turning so we can see it, it's evolving. And it's even how we kind of grow into the next phases of how do we move the field towards healing and recovery. And so this picture is one that I always like to come to. Is my job as a clinician is to help you understand that there will be parts of your story that you feel like are hard and are stone, and maybe there's even some darkness in there. And maybe there's even some parts where you're like, I don't know, this is confusing, an existential fog. And then there'll be parts where you're like, this is awesome. If you're American, you say that. I am growing into myself. There's parts, there's fruits, there's nurturing, there's light parts here. And my job is to say yes. And it's all a masterpiece. It is all something, a piece of you, a part of you. And you have the opportunity as a clinician to work with those in recovery to paint a beautiful picture. And it's encompassing all of it, not just little pieces. And it's not saying, oh, well, that stone is just too hard, too unmovable, you're just numbing out too much. You know, Michelangelo created literally like almost flesh statues from stone. So I try to remind clients that there is beauty in the masterpiece and the story that's you. So again, all right, internet has this way of reaching things worldwide, and the need to protect the right to create, our thinking from fraud and other things with that. So like I said earlier, this came to me in the form of generational sex trafficking is how I entered into it. And in our field, that comes under cults. And so there is an estimated 27 million, and this is a stat that came out last month, that is just sex and slave labor. That's just sex and slave labor. So as clinicians, as I begin to say, wait a second, where was my study about how to help this vulnerable population? Where do I see cult recovery in my textbooks? Where do I see even the mention of sex trafficking or sex trafficked individuals and how to help them? Nada, nilch. What? You're telling me that this is maybe, and this isn't even with tech included, one of the fastest growing vulnerable populations in our world. And there is no textbook about it. There's no recovery models. There's nothing. I don't know. Other clinicians, have you found things where it's like, hey, yes, here is this great recovery model for those who have come out of cults? Anybody find that? I had to search, and I'm still searching. And I think there's reasons for that we're going to unpack a little bit later. So here's what we know. Here's where we are now. When we define a cult, good luck. And here's what we know. So cults are often led by human predators, okay? And authoritarian figures who seek power, money, and sex. These are leaders who typically exhibit traits of narcissism. This is a comprehensive and growing list, and these are more of characteristics. There isn't something where it's like, yes, and this is X, Y, and Z a cult. Why? Because they are, one, evolving faster than our literature can keep up with, especially our ethics. Two, you can be in a cult without being in a cult. What do I mean by that? So how many of you know about Keith Raniere? That's kind of a common one happening. Okay, several of you. For those of you who don't, oh, I'm always going to, is it Nexium? Is that right? It's the Nexium cults. And in there was an infrastructure built into an organization. It was a helping organization, a nonprofit. And so on the outside, you could be seeing great results, being healed even. I mean, some of the work he did was tremendous. I was like, dang, I need to look into that, but not in a bad way, you know? But then on the inside though, you were like, there's just crazy things going on, crazy unethical things. And most of the time when big organizations, especially like that, you may not know. So that's why we have characteristics. That's why we have these red flags that we're trying to bring into more literature. And so this is a very common way to think about what it is when we say cult or undue influence, or what are we actually talking about that contributes to those things. And again, these are, I have the arrows here because they're usually compounding. There isn't usually, oh, well, we isolated somebody and then, you know, usually people are able to figure it out. These are compounding factors, okay? So we dig into this more, and this is again, not new to literature. This is something that many of you have experienced. And again, social structure of cults. I like this one, how it's this way, because usually we think of hierarchy as being linear, more this way. But in a digital social media world, your web actually expands out this way. It's a different way of thinking. It's not just one where there is a hierarchy here. The influence in the web and the social structure is important. And so I like that it's kind of casting out this way. Again, I like this picture because oftentimes charismatic leaders will say, well, I am the solution. I am the problem. I have the solution to your problem. Come to me to find this divine revelation or this healing. As a counselor, I'm like, what? You don't even have a license and you can be preaching some of this stuff. I can't believe it. There is more ethical boards that I have to pass to even get here to be able to say these things than this man who is making many, I say this man, I don't know why, I'm just saying in general, the cults, especially commercial cults, can make a lot of money without a lot of ethics behind there. Okay, so as I was saying, there is characteristics of a cult, and Hassan has been developing this since '88, but this is on his website, you know, the BITE model, if you're not familiar with it. I think we talk about it later. So these are the characteristics that I use for cult typology. It's not just the general for cults. It's not just, you know, this thing. I'm saying many things since the beginning of time can be a cult, okay? I mean, there's some specific things that are, hey, this is clearly a line, this is clearly bad, this is coercion, this is abusive. There are clear lines. I'm not advocating for that. I'm advocating for a mental change in how we define cults. There are many things that can be a cult, but there are specific lines that are important to talk about. So anybody recognize any of these people, any of these things? Yeah, who do you recognize?
Ethan Mary and the Mother God.
Oh, Mother God, who's familiar with Mother God? 2, 3, 4. Okay, this was back in my home state of Colorado. This one was wild. I actually worked with some police officers to kind of walk me through what happened and why it took so long to go in there, and how is it possible that you can literally broadcast death on social media and it is not illegal? It's a great question. I would encourage you guys also to ask yourselves about it and look into this. But this one I put up here because I think it highlights, and she died, actually. Killed might be a strong word, but something to look into here when you look at the mother, it's the Mother of God cult. Is that right? I always get mixed up, but yeah. So that's one that you can look at. And then there's this one over here is a TikTok dancing one. It's on Netflix. Anybody seen it yet? Yeah, that's interesting. Again, another use of commercial cults. But again, looking at how these characteristics permeate through the different social levels of cults is important. So I advocate for this over, hey, there's 4 types of cult groups, watch out for them. I say, no, anybody can use anything. We are incredible tools as humans, especially with stories. Anybody can use anything to be manipulative for their own purposes and agenda. So the power of story. The story we tell in advocating for our clients, the story that we're reshaping maybe in our own narrative and in our own heart. I believe one of the most powerful things that we have here on this earth is story. And so what we choose to do with that and how we share it, especially on platforms like social media, is something I think we maybe want to look at. All right, I talk a lot, so I put this in here for breaks. Questions, comments, concerns, issues, anything. I'm sorry, online, I'm not monitoring the chat, so I'll have to get back to you. Okay. So now let's dig into the linguistic strategies in cults and kind of what that looks like. Okay, so this is particular for more social media, but how many of you have seen hashtag fake news, hashtag justice for, how many of you have seen something like that? Okay, so I did some research on that, and I also was curious to see what other people were saying about that. And so this is a tactic that we know in the cult realm very well, and yet it may not be as familiar to you in the digital realm. So at first I was like, well, justice for, that's kind of important. That's an advocacy point. We want that maybe. And what research is saying is that it's actually loading up people with such emotional language that it defeats the purpose of the advocacy. So there's this undergirding of divisiveness that is known to us as individuals who have gone through manipulation and undue influence that is just easily crossing over in mass media worldwide. And so labels like traitor or patriot or any of these things are commonly thrown out in comments, and there's something to that, okay? And so as we begin to unpack some of these, you know, haters gonna hate. It is what it is. How many of you said that? Like maybe even today, it's okay, this is a safe place. Okay, so listen, there's nothing wrong with that, especially in American. I say it's awesome about anything, so I also said this, you know, it is what it is, can't do much about it. And yet these are shutting down any sort of conversation, they're shutting down debate, right? And these are just simple examples. Another one of the neurolinguistic binds, okay? So on one hand this, on the other hand this. I use that in counseling. And I am trained to not use that in a manipulative way. So how then do cults and other people, or even in social media, present these things as something where, hey, on one hand, maybe this, on one hand, maybe this. And so with that, there are specific strategies that we need to be cautious of, that we as counselors, we are well trained in how to use. And basically what we're realizing is there is a whole literature out there about, hey, in hypnotherapy, they have been doing this and using this in unethical, ruly ways, and Hassan talks about this later, and which I go over here too. And so to begin to understand, hey, there are sides to the way that we use language, the way that we use even some of this hypnotic language that is important for us to understand. I'm not going to get too much into this, but again, like I said, you can scan the QR code and all of this is here for you. You're welcome to talk to me about it later. Okay, so just a quick purview. I know we're kind of wrapping up to the end of our time here. Neurobiologically, what are we talking about there? And how does that play into some of the things that we're talking about? So most of you may know how cults kind of isolate people who are in transition, okay? And so we've known that chronic stress can really amp up a lot of things. If you're in the recovery process and you came out of a traumatic instance, or situation, right? There will be natural things that your body has. How many of you know about the body keeps score? Okay, so there's some of us in here, and it talks about how you have a somatic experiencing when you have gone through trauma, and how to unpack that and unveil that in a therapeutic way is something I'm interested in. And so one of the things where we talk about the neurobiological strategies used in cult manipulation. And so I have this rap that's going to play here.
5, 4, 3, 2. Base it, I'm teaching the autonomic nervous system. Dendritic, so my axon and then back to dendritic. The opposite is somatic, where you control the movements. Autonomic is automatic and control what you're doing. Control the rate and respirations and the pressure. Make the ration and arousal and digestion. Auto regulator to help you when you stress. Run relaxing and to help you when you rest and say run, 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 run.
We know this, that it actually changes how your body reads DNA. It changes how, if you are going to produce offspring in the genetic code that's copied in there, stress is actually much more than just, oh, hey, be careful, watch out. It's actually changing the way that your body reads certain proteins and DNAs, and there's a lot to that. And I would love to discuss, and we don't have a lot of time today. But I just wanted to give you a quick purview of some of the things in our literature that we're talking about. This is a new term. It's not neuroplasticity, it's neuroadaptability, which just came out this last month. And I think that is something that's really interesting. So instead of having neuroplasticity, which I love Hassan's argument when you go to this argument, he's like, it's kind of plasticky. I don't like it. And so when he talked about it, I thought this was a great resource for us to begin to use in a different way. So I integrate neurofeedback and neural technology in my own practice as a way of healing. And if you're a clinician here, I would love to talk about that. Or if you are seeking that, that would be something that's interesting. But neuroadaptability is another term that we're kind of moving towards, where it talks about the resilience and the adaptability of the body to come back to a state of homeostasis. And how do we do that? And what happens when we're not able to do that? All right, now let's talk about some of the ways that we can recover from all of the ick. All of the ick that's out there. There's a lot in technology. There's maybe even some in our own stories, and certainly those in my clients. So I focus on where does shame, guilt, and pain live in the body. And this is from a trauma-informed perspective. I'm also a grief counselor, so I'm not just like, all right, let's open up this can of worms, let's get it out here. That's not how I do this. And oftentimes, clients will come to me and say, I'm ready for healing. I'm ready to move past this. I'm ready. And we don't actually begin the work of healing until much later. And I go into some detail about that later, but there are some really great things that we're learning from chiropractic and pelvic floor that has been really helpful that I also incorporate. And we had the opportunity to do a study with the Avery Center. And what we found is specific to sex trafficked individuals, they're specific to females. There was a lot of crossover between the tension alleviation in the hips and specific floor work done by those. I know there's a lot going on with the yoga culture, but also this is by chiropractic and pelvic floor specialists, okay? And so how they were beginning to release some of that tension and pressure was really interesting, and how that came into the therapeutic frame was really interesting too. I think I saw the 3-minute miracle, maybe somebody presented on it. I don't know if anybody in here went to it. Okay, had some people, is that what it was called, the 3-minute miracle, or was it
Mind
makeover? Okay, well, we know it as a 3-minute miracle. I wanted to go to that one, so you guys probably have some of the latest research right there. But studies show that just 3 minutes a day, if you are able to rest and recover, how welcome, that is something that can reset that system. Just 3 minutes a day of practicing, and if you can get that in the same place, same time, same cup of tea, that there is wonderful results of resetting and coming back to homeostasis. So that's kind of cool. Hey, 3 minutes a day of true relaxation is actually harder than you think, but it does help, okay? And so with that, we have this journey of narrative therapy, of the story that we're telling, of the power of story. And so in session, I tell clients, you have the option to put your story on a TV. Okay, we're Americans, we have a lot of TVs, but maybe, go to cinema, and I'll say you can choose. Do you want it to be a cartoon? Do you want it to be a drama? Do you want it to be action? You can turn it off. You have control of the volume. You have the control of how this story is told. And that has been something that's been really helpful to give clients as much opportunity to have control about how, when, where, what, in which they share. And that's something that I'll use. And I invite them to share with parameters. I say, what you stay here is going to stay here. You can come back to it at any point, but it's processed and done in containment. So for those of you, there's a question about a story here. And for those of you who are on your healing journey, there is really nothing safe about sharing. Nothing. I'm sorry. I wish I could say there was, but that just has not been my experience. What I have found is that there is an honor in sharing your story. What I have found is that there will be people and institutions and places who will say, thank you for your gift of vulnerability. Safety, maybe in containment, I don't know, but otherwise, I have not found safety to be something as part of this story. And what I mean by that is it's not going to feel safe when you share, when you talk about that. I don't think I experienced that. That could just be me, could just be my experiences, but there's something to the fact that it is a gift when someone sheds their mask and says, this is what really happened. And you know what? I meet clients and I say, in America, we always like, well, have you walked a mile in their shoes? Do you know, George? Do you really know? Have you walked a mile in their shoes? And anyways, name's George, I'm sorry, just used it randomly. I say, you know what? I trust you've walked your mile. I trust you've walked your mile. This doesn't need to be another place for you to come in and have to teach me about the 5 levels of your cultic thing that you're into. I will do that myself. That is my job as a counselor. What I have found is that when I meet people and I say, yeah, that sounds really painful and difficult. I don't even know what to say right now. That does way more for the therapeutic rapport than me giving them something to read, than another homework, or me trying to say, this is right, this is wrong. So to sit humbly and to listen with trauma-informed and grief-informed eyes and ears is something that's really important. Okay, so lastly, I will say this. Play is something we look at Denver Seminary a lot. And it's a seminary, so it is from a Christian upbringing. And even if I presented at this conference, they were like, don't they think we're a cult? And I was like, well, some of you might wonder myself. But also there's something really beautiful about flourishing life, okay? I want to know about the flourishing life. I've been through so much ick. I was kind of curious about like, well, what is it that they say is the life? Or what is it that brings happiness and hope and joy? And so this is a model I'm working on with my colleagues for multiple reasons. And one of the best things that I have found in recovery, or even with those who are in a cult, is to begin to learn how to play again. And I don't have a lot of time to discuss this, but if you have questions about it, other than what I've posted up here, I'm willing to talk about it. And you may say, well, Shawnna, play. I don't know. Do you know the story? Do you know the hard things? Do you know what's actually happening there? And I would say, I don't know your personal story. I don't know what has happened, but I do imagine that a little bit of happiness and play in the terms like what we're talking about might be needed. And that was something we are curious about. So there isn't this magical answer or anything that I've discovered. It's a continuum. It's very difficult, but if there's one thing that I can encourage you with and leave you with is to play more. Thank you, guys. Your last little shout out, if you don't have this, buy it right now. It's so great. I love it so much. I use it all the time. Actually, it's been a really great resource for me, myself, and my healing journey. All right, and then I will put my code up one more time. You can scan the code and it will give you my entire presentation. And then I'm going to get out of the way.
There's somebody on the.
No, you're, there is a lot to go to.